Were you in the building? Well,
We didn't see it.
I didn't see you.
Really observant of you
You
there.
have to wear, shiny hat or something.
Taneytown Community Comprehensive Plan Workshop, please come to order. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening and everyone's listening. Would you please stand to the pledge to the flag?
Flag of the United States of America, republic for which it stands.
Let the records reflect the members that are here. Bradley Brown is absent this evening. Emily and Craig and Tiffany, welcome. All right. Everyone should have received the minutes of our last meeting. Should have been January 21st, 2025. Is there any corrections or additions to those minutes?
None.
Approval or exception?
I move to accept the minutes.
Okay, is there Barry, any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous, thank you. Okay, who would like to start off leading us off here?
I guess I'll start.
Craig?
So good evening, everybody. It's good to see you.
Good evening.
One of these days we'll get down there again in person and see you. So
Good.
We'll be here.
Looking forward to it.
it's yeah, when it gets warmer. So
Yeah, okay. That sounds good.
Next month.
yeah. So yeah. So last month we left you with quite a bit. There was a lot to read, and there was a little homework assignment courtesy of Jim when we were left it off talking about small towns, and you were all tasked with coming up with what your definition of a small town is that might help kind of focus things and kind of guide where we go from here. So did anybody do their homework?
Okay, Barry, you want to start with yours?
Dog ate mine. Go ahead.
Barry,
Read what I wrote now.
read it or just give your,
The highlights are, I like to have wide streets, so we park on both sides. I like to see single-family homes on nice-sized lots. I like to preserve the historical buildings. And we have to rehab them as close to original as we could. And I like to have a friendly atmosphere for both the people and the business. Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Chris,
I mean,
you want to do yours?
to me, small town is about atmosphere and like a vibe more than anything else. Because it should be, like you said, friendly. It should be a community. And one of the things that helps bring that community is people being closer together. So, you have a view that's on the opposite end of the spectrum than I have in terms of the wide streets and the big houses on single-family lots. To me, that's a suburb. That's not a city. That's not a town. Towns, when you go into a lot of towns where there's nicely neat laid out streets and little quarter-acre lots with a nice little house on it, that's much closer to that. And then in the center of a town, there's a shopping district and places where there are, apartments and a little bit more density. And the density decreases as you go away, and that's more of a town. But the small town feel to me is more of a vibe and an atmosphere. It's not something we can create through zoning. It's something that's created by the people who live there.
Say that everything is Taneytown, or where would it stop for you? I mean, everything that we accept in the future is still part of Taneytown and we need
If it's in
anything
the,
real
if it's in the
close?
city limits, it's still part of Taneytown, obviously. But, you know, there's that, the theory of the decreasing density where you know, your community feel increases as the density increases, and that takes you to your downtown and your center. And then you get out, as you get out further, then the density decreases, and then you're on your larger single-family lots. But, you know, to try to move everything to that, I don't think is the right way. But again, it's my opinion. I don't, there is no right or wrong, there's our
Yeah.
opinions.
Let's just listen to each other's
Yeah, I'm just wondering.
I
No,
think,
I mean, those are, I mean, it's definitely, right, we need these differing viewpoints, and it all helps kind of mold where, you know, the direction that the city wants to go. I mean, some of that is dictated by those growth boundaries, in terms of, you know, how far the city really can expand, and, you know, where those water and sewer services are available. That has a lot of impact on lot size as well. Um, if public sewer is not available, then you're looking at those larger lots, and those would typically be um, on the outer parts, on the outskirts of the city. So but it does take a mix to be successful, I think. Um, I mean, just with the two comments so far, it's kind of sticking to some of those strengths that had come out of the survey with regards to, you know, people do have that small town character, right? They identify that, the small town character and feel. And to your point, it is more of a vibe than something it's really how you perceive it rather than what the words are. So that's very important. And it's how do you create that atmosphere and feel?
just from 2010, when that vision was put out, and it's 15 years from then, you know, what Craig was saying about the survey, you know, the expectations, we all want that small town. But they're different from 2010 till now. You know, we have other people that have come in from their expectations. So back in 2010, you know, I think the vision there was totally different from what it is now, you know. But we have to, and I totally agree, Taneytown, I like the small town. I've been here for 38 years. But we have to make sure from what we've seen on that survey, there's some expectations from newer people who have been here, probably less than 5 years, 10 years. I think that opened my eyes with that survey, that what people,
survey brought out a lot of high points.
yeah, it did.
Yep. Dan, you want to make any comments?
Sure. So I did my homework and emailed it out to everybody. I don't know if everybody got a chance to read it. But I actually agree pretty close with what Chris is saying there. I do think the small town feel is something that you get from the people. And I think you can only get that if you're in that town for a long period of time and you participate in activities in that town. So you can't just stay in your house. You got to go out and do stuff. And that could be anything from going to your kid's soccer game or your grandkid's soccer game, or being on this board, or being in the fire company. There's a lot of different things that you can do that will make you feel part of the town. It's just so when you go into the grocery store, you see people and you know they're your neighbor because you recognize them and you see them out on the street. And so I think that's kind of what gives you that small town feel. There may be very little that we can do to on the planning and zoning to kind of like foster that. But what I do think is that if you encourage people to move into town that are planning on staying there, so they're coming to town, I'm bringing my family, I got a job, I'm planning on staying here, I want my small lot, I'm going to put my garden on it, next year I'm going to build a garage. That's the kind of people that I think contribute to the small town feel. So if you come in, I'm not really in favor of a lot of townhouses. I believe that most people buy a townhouse as their starter home. So they're going to move out of that eventually. They're not, especially a 3 or 4 story townhouse, you're not moving into that as your retirement home. So people were moving into those kind of homes, and they're going to be moving out, and they're going to be rentals, or they're going to be changeover, but they're not necessarily the people that are going to give you that small town feel. Now, I'm very careful to say that. I have friends that live in townhouses, they've been in there for a long period of time, so there's always, it's not 100% across the board, but, so I think there are some things that we could do to help foster that with bringing in the businesses. I agree that the downtown should be like a vibrant area where you can go, hang out with your friends, you know, go have a beer down the street, and, I mean, it used to be that way in town. But I think that, and then again, as you move away from the center of town, that's where the density needs to be relaxed as you move away from town. So I think that's, I think one of the hard things is trying to figure out whether you put the houses there first or you bring the businesses there first. So I think we got, in my personal opinion, I think we got enough houses. We got to work on the business side. But as soon as you get the businesses, you need the houses, you need the people there to you know, so the businesses can thrive. So I think, I mean, Chris and I, we agree for once. I don't know.
We agree on that part of it.
So on some of it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the danger about, going to the, you know, lots, big lots and talking about knowing your neighbor and, you know, meeting people at the grocery store, and it is you have to watch out because you start to become exclusionary at that point. And then, you know, newcomers don't feel welcome, and then that creates a whole different attitude, I think, than what we want to foster. And I think that there is, I will tell you that, you know, I talk to new residents, I see people all the time, and there are some people that think that this is a good old boy town, you know, and they don't want anything else. And then you start looking like, you know, you're kind of backwards in a way. I think we need to be careful and be balanced about our approach to housing, for that reason. You know, you don't want to be seen as being that place where, well, we don't want your kind here because you don't have enough money to buy a big house on a big lot. That's a real danger.
I think I said my piece last month, and I kind of agree with everybody's opinion. I think the whole idea is maybe if we can slow the pace down of our lifestyle, be more involved with all the activities and the different organizations within town. It's good when you're young and you have a family, you got the schools and you got the kids involved, that brings the families together. But then when you reach a certain age, unless you're into some type of civic organization or another group, you kind of drift apart. And I think that's one thing by having the different communities, you become part of the community and not the town. And that's where I think we need to pull us all together as citizens of Taneytown, citizens and friends of Taneytown.
So I agree, and so, you know, we have Carol Vista, they have a lot of activities out there on their own. But I think if we had more activities downtown here, I think they would come in.
But it would have to meet all different ages.
Oh,
You got
absolutely.
the Carol Vista, you got
Absolutely.
Beach Crossing, you gotta have other different age groups. And like I say, with the townhouses, you usually have the younger ones, and that's when they start the family. So things down the town, and I was thinking, so many things we have at the park, which pulls everybody in that direction, the west end of town. You get the people on the other end, unless there's something that they're specifically interested in, they don't get involved. So some way, we've got to do something that would spark the interest of an individual to get them involved.
Carol Vista is a good example because they sit out there at the edge of town. It's 330 some houses in an enclave out there by themselves. And a lot of times they keep to themselves. They have their own activities. They have their own, you know, clubhouse and center and their own pool and all the other amenities that go with that kind of a development. And so they tend to be a little bit isolated and insulated. And so the question is, how, you know, what can we do, what do we need to do to draw them into town?
Okay.
Craig,
That-
go ahead.
that- Yeah, I mean, those are all great points. And I mean, I think that one of your strengths, one of the 10 strengths is that strong sense of community engagement. I mean, you have a great program in place. Maybe it's just publicizing that better. I mean, I don't, Emily, and you can jump in. I mean, in a lot of communities we work in, I don't know of many more that have as many events as what Taneytown has on an annual basis. And maybe it's, I don't know how well attended they all are. I mean, we attended the one community event, but the weather wasn't great. And there was still a decent turnout for that. But I mean, I think you have the framework in place really to build upon, right? It's not like you're starting from scratch. And maybe it is, you know, working with just working to how to get a better turnout, getting people more engaged with what you're already doing. I mean, some of the other things that came out as strengths out of the survey too, which goes to the small town, you know, character is the historic and cultural history of the city as well. And what any thoughts on that? Any impressions? Is that an accurate kind of characterization?
I think one of the things we're missing is arts, performing arts, visual arts. I think that is something that can bring a community together, and I think that really is something that we are missing here. You know, and we don't have a lot of spaces for those sorts of things to occur. We don't have that downtown park with the band shell or with the, you know, or a stage, or even any kind of civic building where you can hold an event or a concert or anything like that. So that kind of thing is, I think, part of what's lacking, and part of what you know, kind of prevents that community feeling from happening. You know, Taneytown is kind of a donut, right? There's all of these really nice developments and a lot of houses and a lot of things going on around what is currently kind of an empty center. And I think that if we can build on that center and create the kind of things that bring people downtown, I think we can make that happen.
Does Taneytown do any sort of like street festival events in the summer? Like, I'm in Doylestown and we do, actually there's multiple events in the summers. They completely block off one of the roads. It's pedestrian only. There's dining out there. Sometimes they have art festivals where they have music set up and things like that, and tents. They have a farmer's market where they close off the street as well. I mean, I know Main Street's probably not an option for that, but they do it on some of the side streets here as well.
I think they have had festivals like that in the past. I guess it's kind of tough for us to shut down our main street where most of those buildings would be. They're state roads, so we can't even shut them down for a parade.
Right. So that's a real issue for us, is that we don't have any kind of, you know, I'll use the word bypass here. There's nowhere else for all the heavy traffic to go to make it around town. I mean, the roads just simply wouldn't take the stress of a day's worth of the heavy trucks that go through this place. So, you know, so to be able to have that kind of a festival or something like that in your downtown, you know, is something that's going to have for us to wait sometime until we are able to.
Well, we have a downtown.
Do we make a bypass and we have a downtown here that's worth coming downtown too? You know, so that's, you know, geography to an extent works against us.
Tiffany, if you'd like to move up front here and join,
You can
feel-
tap
Welcome to
we
join the
welcome.
conversation, Tiff.
I mean, there's mics right there, and if you, feel free, you're part of this. So feel free to,
You can have Brad's seat.
we can fit the name tag. But
You'll make you an
back
honorary
to
member.
your comments, but the trouble is, there's not enough open space downtown
Exactly.
to be able to have some type of whatever. I
One
mean,
of the
you got the
things-
police in front of the police station. Country Kitchen on the other side, where they're using for parking. But as far as downtown, to have open space to draw people downtown.
Right, so so you don't have the open space, so you'd have to use the sidewalks in the street, which we really can't do. So, right, so, maybe it means, maybe we gotta think about some creative things that we can do. I don't know what those are off the top of my head. Making use of some of the spaces in some of the buildings that are, not being fully utilized. I know there's a small performance space in the back at 1 Frederick, what used to be the Irish Moon, where they used to have bands and stuff in there. The second floor at 1 York Street, used to be a movie theater, and it actually still has kind of the remnants of a stage there on the second floor of that building. Of course, the problem with that is on the second floor, and there is no handicap access to that. So that becomes an issue. So there are some things, but those things are in private hands, and so the question is, how do we get those folks involved and wanting to do some of these activities and some of these things?
So if I may, Chairman, so the parks is 3/10 of a mile from downtown. So maybe we need to get some word out or get some, interest. What would people like to see? What kind of events would people like to go see? Lorena and her committee has done an incredible job. The city started reinvesting in the parks, call it 5-6 years ago, where big money was spent. We have more parkland in the city of Taneytown than I believe any other city in Carroll County. Nicely developed. Maybe hanging out on asphalt when it's 95 degrees out is something people don't want to do. They want trees and grass. So, but it's close. I mean, I don't want to take a beating here, but downtown is important. But I think it's one of few important things when it comes to, what is a small, what is our town? What is the city? I don't notice downtown. I don't notice the parks. I don't know what it is, but it's got to be a combination of things because, like right now, who wants to do anything in this weather? Nothing's going on. There's not a lot of event space for things to go on. But if you go out to the bowling alley right now, I don't think they can fit anybody else in there. So it's what's available. I'll be curious to see what Meadowbrook 5, 6, and 7 bring to the table as well as Meads Crossing over this year and next year in terms of sports. How many of those kids are playing sports? If you go on the Facebook, which is the ultimate, if you go on the Facebook, you rarely see someone from Meads commenting robustly on Facebook. They have a Facebook page that is unique to them, and a very strong I'm sorry, what?
I was gonna say, we can't access that. It's a closed group.
Yeah, I've even tried it as the director of planning and zoning. I ain't code enforcement, but they don't want me, but that's okay. My yard's bigger. So, but when it gets down to it, there is a lot to this being a bedroom community. And, I'm trying to forget, but, those days of waking up at 5, you get your, the 2 kids ready for school and fed and off to the sitter, what have you, and then getting off work and, breaking all that down and homework and all that. There's not a lot of time to, next thing you know, it's 8 o'clock at night and people are tired. So in the summertime, you have vacations and that type of stuff. So I just think that maybe we need to spend a little bit of time putting it out there as what type of events would adults like to see, perhaps. Because there's a boatload of stuff for the kids. I mean, if you have kids and they're not happy with our park system and all the amenities and, events that Lorena has going on down there, some people just can't satisfy, I guess, but it's there. It's a lot of it, really is. I was amazed at the event when we, city manager Wybrecht and I and Councilman Tillman, when we did the comp plan down at the park, how many people were from Emmitsburg, Union Bridge, New Windsor. So it's a pretty tight, they feel, they look at our events schedule in Littlestown and those other cities. So that's pretty neat. So we're at that little bit of an area that we can draw from them as well for participants and stuff downtown and in the parks, whatever.
I wonder if we can, and if there would be any use to, get location information from the Parks and Recs programs, specifically the youth sports programs, as to where people live. Like, we could get a spreadsheet database kind of thing of addresses. Emily, maybe you can tell me if there's some way that could be kind of filtered through to figure out where in the city those are and kind of map that out. Jim, I don't know if we can talk to Lorena about maybe trying to get that information from the various sports leagues and maybe get a handle on where the people are coming from that are part of these programs.
We can certainly look into that. The Athletic Association may be hesitant to share personal information, but
They
but
just
maybe if
addresses,
we
not
just- right,
names.
if
We don't need
just are
names, we
looking
just
for
need addresses. Right.
That, right, we could potentially plot that out.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good suggestion, and that's kind of an plan implementation item, more so than I think we identify that as a potential opportunity to pursue, and then identify that as something to be further investigated through the plan implementation, rather than part of the plan itself. But I think that's a great suggestion. Yeah, some of the other things that came out, like opportunities to look at, to investigate. Oh, hold on, I just had a list here. Again, looking at coming out of the plan was, enhancing some of the connectivity of the different neighborhoods too, the walkability of the city. Looking at, both from a walkability and a bike infrastructure, having people able to flow freely without having to get in a vehicle can help, maybe, create that sense of community. And what are those opportunities to look at? The other thing that came out of the survey from an opportunity standpoint, and goes to your point, Chris, improving civic engagement, maybe some of those cultural aspects, and looking at better public outreach strategies like what you're talking about. So, and I think we talked about this last time. I mean, the lack of a newspaper or a newsletter, right? Even, that seems to be, that's kind of fallen out of favor. But maybe there is a need for that at some point to help that community engagement. So that's, again, looking at some of those implementation items. Did you all look at the goals from the 2010 plan? Did you have a chance to look at those?
Yep.
Okay. Why don't we just kind of go through those and see what you feel is maybe still relevant versus what is no longer a priority. We have our own thoughts on that, but I'd like to hear what the commission thinks about these elements. And I think a lot of these you've touched on already, but let's just kind of run through them quickly just to get your sense of where we stand from now versus 2010. Under the land use and growth management, that small town theme comes up again in that. making the downtown area the focal point. Um, Future development being designed to complement from a traffic and pedestrian standpoint. Ensuring development plans are sensitive to existing physical and man-made features, basically environmental protection standards, and provide walkability between residential areas and businesses. Anything there that you feel is maybe not as important, or maybe something that should be emphasized?
I'll go first.
Go ahead,
You good?
go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so, I was actually, not surprised. It wasn't the first time I read it, but, I guess it actually seemed pretty relevant today. I mean, I didn't really see anything in there that I thought was absolutely out of the question. I thought was absolutely relevant. The discussion we had on small town atmosphere, I think we all pretty much agree on what that is. So at the time when I read it a couple years ago, I guess I wasn't sure if we all had the same interpretation. So maybe that's not really an issue. Maybe we do have that. But as I went through all the goals, I noticed a few things which you mentioned also, Craig. You know, so we said a couple times that we wanted the downtown area to be the focal point. And to Daryl's point, is that really what we want, or is that what we need? I guess I was thinking that until Daryl's comments right here, so I've got to think some more. But really everything, I didn't see anything in there that I thought was absolutely not relevant. With the only possible extension, I'd have to reread the bullet here on the Antrim Boulevard extension. But other than that, I think everything is, I think it's spot on, really.
No, just the only other thing that I would bring up is that when we talk about walkability between residential areas and to the downtown and to making things pedestrian friendly, is then you go back and say, well, we want, you know, houses on big lots. Well, that spreads everything out, and suddenly you're much less pedestrian friendly that way. You know,
I think
and
you exaggerate on the size of the lot, because
but
I can walk to my neighbor's house pretty quick.
Yeah. Well, that is true, but when you start compounding that across your neighbor and his other neighbor, and it does stretch that out. So, you know, but again, that stays within that concentric, you know, decreasing density theory, you know, to come density out from the center. You know, and I'm not saying that there isn't a place for the big house on the big lot. Just not all of them.
Drop back to the downtown focus point.
But
What
Jim,
do you mean
your
focus?
microphone keeps cutting out. I'm not
Excuse
sure
me,
why.
that might be because I'm turning my head.
Oh, maybe, okay.
I'm trying to get across to everyone up here, but the focus point of downtown, what is the focus point of downtown? You walk down the street, one side looks the same as the other side. Not a whole lot of activity.
And that's one of the things that we're hoping to change. We've tried to make some fits and starts at that in the last 10 years. You know, you always go back to the old buzzword of streetscape and what that did to the downtown community and what that did to the community feel of this town. You know, and how many businesses closed up on the heels of that. And so now we have a completely different, everybody talks about what it was like, you know, 20 years ago. Well, the streetscape happened in the middle and killed a lot of that. You know, so we almost have to rebuild that in order to have it. Well, we do have to rebuild it in order to have it, because we certainly don't have it now. And I'm not, you know, I'm not saying you're wrong, because you're clearly right. You know, there's nothing here that draws your attention and gives you a reason to come down here and be part of this community. And that's, you know, that's one of the things that I feel is important, and I've been working kind of tirelessly over the last year and a half to try to change.
What I've noticed on weekends when there's activities out at 1844 at Antrim, they have their parking lots are filled and people are walking to see what?
To see
And-
that we don't
and
have anything.
All we have is downtown, and yet the biggest draw is Antrim 1844.
Shame.
That's a shame, and that's part of history.
I,
How, if we can incorporate somehow that function or that setting to draw people for downtown for a reason. I mean, we don't even have a souvenir shop downtown.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with you, because if we had those things, those people have plenty of money if they're staying there, they have plenty of money to spend.
Yes.
But there's nowhere here for them, nothing for them to spend their money on here, or very little. I don't want to say nothing, but very little, and hardly enough to draw anybody out from off of that beautiful campus over there.
I mean,
So
even with our advertisement or whatever we do, we never mention 1844 Antrim, you know,
yeah,
that place represents. That's kind of, doesn't even, kind of sets aside from the city of Taneytown.
and that's that's something that that probably will fall out of some of the new things that we're doing with trying to reorganize the Main Street, is how do we incorporate that into the marketing of the town, and of how do we market that not only to people to come here and spend their money, but for people to come here and set up a shop, right? So, I think we have a resource there we make very little use of, and it's not just Antrim 1844, it's the Tannery Barn, it's Venue Bouchon.
And you're right.
And it's the parks, and it's all the events that we have, and it's, there are lots of things to be said for, we just don't seem to be saying them.
Yeah, I don't think
Can't
you're
say
taking credit enough for what you are doing, right? I don't think it's being publicized enough for what, you need to really, kind of work on a rebranding type approach. Yeah.
I can't see you advertising it until you get the shops downtown to advertise for.
Oh,
Because
yeah,
right
there-
now,
yeah,
it's nothing.
there's a whole chicken and egg thing going on there, and you're
Yeah.
exactly correct.
Yeah.
So we have to straighten some things out first before we make those steps. I think we tried in the last iteration to make those steps before we knew what direction we were walking in.
Back to you, Craig.
Yep, Dan, I think you mentioned the Boulevard extension, the Greenway. Was that?
Yeah, I guess, I just would have to read that again to make sure it, utilize, yeah, I think that's still, it's probably still accurate for what, I think that's, I think that would, help, the town if we had, I think it would help, FlowServe and Evapco getting their trucks down the road without having to come through town. I don't know how much else it would help, unless you were going between Frederick and Westminster, or Emmitsburg. It would help quite a bit. Probably wouldn't help the log trucks coming up the road.
No, because until we would have the ability to finish with Worthington Boulevard, you won't help the log truck thing, because they all come up York and Frederick.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's still accurate. that
Yeah,
statement.
and that would follow through with the results of the survey and the background data that we have collected, in that, it comes up as, traffic congestion and traffic concern, safety, just crossing the street, that's a big concern in terms of an existing weakness, and then a continuing threat with regards to, not solving those problems will just have a downward spiraling effect.
I do think it's interesting, everybody complains about the traffic downtown, but we're trying to put more businesses down here to attract more traffic, so just,
I guess it's a different kind of traffic, right? Yeah.
Well, when you're talking about 15,000 cars a day, the few extra cars that we'd like to draw to businesses downtown aren't a whole big drop in that bucket. It's the first 15,000 we got to do something about.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
the,
it helps that people are slowing down to look for a parking spot rather than just flying through the middle of town.
but I think it's just a short period of, a relatively short period of time when it's really bad in town, and it's bad when it's bad.
Yeah,
It takes a while,
When it is bad, it's bad.
but it doesn't last all
And
day.
even Saturdays, it used to be that, Saturday wasn't really bad. But Saturdays in the summertime here, you can hardly, when I come out Middle Street, I can't hardly make a left turn. You know, because it's just camper after camper and you know, vehicles and it's just, there's a lot of traffic through here on the weekends. It's a lot more than, any more in the last, and it seems like it's worse in the last 2 years than it was before.
Yeah. And maybe Jim can chime in on this because I know that there was, there was a difficulty getting the state to basically support or even fund a a bypass or a greenway. And so how do we, Jim, is that still kind of the state's position on those types of things, or?
We are having conversations with District 7 of the State Highway Administration regarding the future of the road. And they have gotten to the point where they've acknowledged that if the road were constructed, it would benefit the state highway network, that they would see accepting the road as theirs, similar to, I guess, what was done in Hampstead, where the bypass was built and then eventually the old Route 30 was deeded over to the city, to the town. So State Highway is on board in principle with that, but of course there is no commitment of funding. But along with that comes the expectation that as segments of the road are constructed, they will be constructed to state highway specifications. That adds a lot of expense on the developer of those sections of road. So we are also having conversations with the developers of Mountain Brook Farm right now as to, how that road is to be designed. And of course, the big question is who's going to pay for the upgrade from city spec to state spec. So it's a very tangled issue right now because, and I mentioned this in an email to council not long ago. A year ago, I was absolutely thrilled that Mountain Brook Farm was willing to build this section of road that crosses their property without any driveways that service their lots. That's a big deal. I was thrilled. A little more recently, when State Highway met with us and said, let's work out the discussion resulted in, let's work out a letter of agreement where we specify, what has to happen for us to eventually accept this road. Like, this is great. We haven't had these kind of talks for 30 years. So now we've kicked off the talks and now it all comes down to the money. So, if we build the road to city specs and before SHA accepts it, it needs another investment to bring it up to the state highway standards. Do we end up spending more money than, just contributing to it in the beginning? But then the idea of, I'll say the perception of growth by a lot of the community, is not very favorable. And the idea of contributing towards a road, even though it doesn't, directly serve this community, is probably not going to be favorable to a lot of people. So it's quite the little dilemma that we're faced with right now. And on the one hand, we certainly don't want to throw away the progress we've made with Mountain Brook. So the question is kind of, do we let them build it to a lesser standard and at least get the right-of-way secured and get a piece of pavement in there? And then we've got, a third of it in place if we can get the 1,000 feet across FlowServe built. But then down the road, will State Highway accept it? If it doesn't become a state road, State Highway still manages Route 140. Nothing ever changes. So it's really that question of, is there appetite to invest now? Does it make sense for the city, over the next 50 years to do this now, or to figure out a way, to help the developer do it? Or do we kick the can down the road and, when the rest of the segments eventually get built over maybe the next 20 years, then we have to go back and upgrade everything? But maybe State Highway will have money by then. Who knows? My crystal ball is very cloudy, so.
And Jim, do we know what the biggest hurdles are? Is it geometry? Is it right-of-way width? Is it shoulder width? What are the biggest hurdles?
It, the state paving spec is significantly beefier than the city or county equivalent for this level of a road. But the stormwater management aspect is also challenging because the State Highway Administration would want to accept all of basically the stormwater management for this road would have to be separate from the stormwater management for the rest of the development project.
Right, sure.
So that almost requires two separate stormwater plans. And of course, there's cost associated with that as well.
Yeah, okay.
We're awaiting numbers from the developer's engineer on the cost discrepancy between state standards and city, county standards. So that will inform.
And there may be things we can do in an incremental fashion, you know, you know, I think the state wants an open section, not a closed section, is that, if I remember right, is that, you know, so if we put city level pavement thickness, you know, and then later go back and mill the top 2 inches off and thicken up the base and put a new surface on it. If it's an open section, then that's not really a difficult thing to do. You know, if you have curbs, then that becomes a much more difficult process.
I think, and you can probably speak to this better than I can, but I believe that the overall road section from the sub base all the way to the wear course is more stout
Yes.
than the city
Yeah.
specification. So
What I'm saying is that maybe we can buy time by making a thicker sub base.
Right.
And putting our standard thickness surface on it.
whether there's some compromise to be had, right? And at this point, we basically have State Highway Administration's first cut of here's what we want in order to accept this down the road. We don't really know, you know, I guess we need to look at this as something of a negotiation as, you know, okay, that's your first offer? All right, well, how about if we do this? But at the same time, you know, this is farther than we've gotten for the, you know, what,
30
20,
years.
26 years I've been around.
I think we're starting to drift a little bit off our course here.
Well, but I mean, all this kind of plays back into the comprehensive plan though, because this is all still part of it.
For sure, yeah, because if we put that recommendation in the plan, right, we have an alignment or a general alignment identified. And I think the most important aspects based on what Jim is saying, I think, is making sure that at the very minimum that the desired right-of-way width is reserved, as well as the general geometry, right? Can the road be constructed in meeting the state level geometry requirements? So, and you know, the actual road cross section is another issue, but you know, just take the steps that we can accomplish right now. But that's important to know, because I know it was back and forth with regards to the you know, the likelihood of that road ever being built, and should we continue to put it in the plan, or is that just a pipe dream that will never happen? So it sounds like it's more so something that still needs to be included, because it does provide a solution, and it will, you know, address some of those threats that have been identified already. So. Yeah, transportation, that's kind of the biggest issue under the transportation element. And then the other elements focus on some of that connectivity, things that we talked about, multimodal, you know, bikes, pedestrian, you know, something that came up in the survey, and I don't know how relative it is, if it's really something that we need to address, or if it's just something that a few people brought up and got kind of to the top of the survey. But what about, is there a need from your perspective for more public transportation serving the city?
I think it is. There's a lot of people that, if there was a means to get from Taneytown to Westminster for appointments and things like that.
We have that.
Well, but didn't they stop the one, wasn't there a,
I still see them.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Trailblazer still comes through and makes a variety of stops in town and then goes back to Westminster, correct?
Yes, Carroll Transit still maintains their loop of Taneytown and the connection between Taneytown and Westminster. You know, the route is not, it's not an ongoing loop, so, you know, you have to schedule it. It only runs, you know, certain times of the day. I don't have it in front of me, but it's very limited.
And is that pretty much the extent of the public transportation or the need for it? Is it more serving the senior population in the city more so than anything else?
I think it serves the senior population and those who do not have ownership or access to a vehicle of their own, and perhaps to a lesser degree, student population.
Might have some information for us.
There we go, there we
Come
go.
join us, Tiffany. Your turn.
So transit runs from the one route, the Trailblazer route does come around a few times a day, and it ends at 5 or before 5. So if you could get to work outside of Taneytown, but getting back, you're not going to make it after 5 o'clock, which is obviously a hindrance. And Taneytown's ridership for the Trailblazer has been quarterly dropping over the last 2 years since I've been on the transportation that they have. There you go. There's your.
Yep.
So at last one, thank you. Yes, 319.
And, I mean, sorry to interrupt you here, but, you know, it seems to me that that's kind of a self-defeating thing. You know, well, the ridership is dropping, so we're going to cut service. You know, well, you don't have good enough service to start with, which is why you don't have a lot of ridership, so cutting service isn't exactly going to help that.
And from my understanding, service has not been cut in Taneytown for a while, as far as I know.
I don't know, because I've never.
But yes, ridership continues to decline, and unknown reasons, because ridership on the other routes is actually up and increasing. So, but Taneytown substantially has gone down. Then there is also the on-demand. And the on-demand service, if you schedule ahead of time, like you can have reoccurring rides, and that's usually to the doctor's appointments that happen like every 2 weeks or something like that. It's a lot easier. And I've heard from the public that it's difficult to arrange, like if you have to be at a job at 8 o'clock on one day and 12 o'clock the next day, and it just doesn't work out, and everything's already booked, and there are limited slots that you can get for those times. So there are struggles in that as far as what Taneytowns are in particular. We at the level downtown that we've seen, we're not sure. It might be where the stops are located. It might be the time frame to get people back here. We're just not sure.
Well, one of the difficulties that I would think exists with the way that this system is set up is that there's no way to get around Taneytown itself with using the Trailblazer. You can get on it, you know, at Kenny's, but if you need to come downtown and the bus is headed south when it leaves Kenny's, you're not going to ride for an hour and a half on that bus to wait till it comes back up to go downtown. You know, and so, you know, and I can tell you, because I see it all the time, people who walk from right here in the downtown area all the way down to the grocery stores and back, you know, either carrying their groceries or pulling a little cart with them, you know, and that's what they got to do regardless of the weather, you know. And so my question to that is there a value to the bus when it comes in doing a loop within town first, you know, doing a
So what that would involve is apparently there needs to be some sort of proof that there is a need for that area. And once that's documented, then it can go forward. That's my understanding from the people, I can't think of the name of them offhand, but they are contracted to do the bus service. So that's my understanding. And again, that's just, I've sat in the office, I'm in the room and heard it, but I can't say verbatim that that's exactly what it is. But I'm pretty sure as soon as the need is identified and proven, so there is a level of proof of that, then there would need to be stops in different locations that were
right. But then if there's no bus, if there's nothing right now that does that, how would you prove that need was there?
definitely worth opening that conversation with the people. I want to say Carl Connect, I think is the name of them. Sorry, I think that's the name of them. And just having the conversation of what do you need, and then possibly having a plan to meet that need, to meet that I'm not sure off the top of my head. But I can try to find out more information and get you.
Chris, are you looking for one stop downtown to start here, then go back?
No, what I'm thinking is that if the bus comes in and makes one loop through town and heads back out, right? But if you're living at this end of town, you want to get to this end of town, if the bus came in, made its loop, and then made another loop before it left, then if you lived here, you could get here. But, you know, we're getting a little deep into the weeds. But
Yeah.
that's, you know, if that's not something that's possible, then we need to think about dropping public transportation out of the plan, because it's not something that's going to happen.
Yeah, so I mean, so the takeaway I'm getting here is it's really working with that local transit authority to see if there is the need or ways to enhance the public transit service to the community.
I think it's definitely a need.
Yeah.
that we
Yeah, absolutely.
Should stay in here. That's something we need to
You know,
encourage.
I don't know if it's even a possibility, but I've thought of like municipalities having shuttles around the towns themselves or the city itself. I don't know if that's an option here.
We have to document a need.
Yeah.
Or maybe somebody needs to start, you know, are there any Uber drivers in the city?
Yeah.
Maybe that's like,
So when I read the part on transportation, yeah, everything is fine, but I did not think about a bus at all. So I think all the bullets we have are fine, but it doesn't mean we necessarily have to have our own bus service. I think that's pretty much outside the bounds of what we're trying to do, my opinion.
well, no,
Other than
well, yeah,
public.
but for the city itself, right, yeah.
I don't think we need the thought of the public transportation somewhere.
And maybe what we need to throw in the plan is that that's something that needs continued study and motion
Exactly,
forward.
right, yeah,
Right.
yep.
What I didn't notice anything on the transportation was, has there ever been any thought about a park and ride or a park, what do they say, Sharon Park? Or Kitson Park, whatever that is. Other areas you see, like down off 32 there. And you know, the amount of people goes through Taneytown, it'd be great to have it on the other end of Taneytown. Instead of, and is that something that's usually handled by the state?
So it would be the state, it would be, it could be, you know, a private bus service that does, you know, runs that kind of operation. I know around where we are, there are public lots, but it's the service providers are private, going into New York City and things like that for taking commuters in for the day. So.
I think a park and ride lot would be a good idea. It's just a question of where would you put that?
Yeah, the space to put it, but
Yeah. And I guess that would go back to Emily, we'd have to look at, you know, what would help kind of drive that was where are people commuting to that are, you know, what's
they're
the
all
sense-
coming through the square.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't know where they're going.
But they're all coming through the square.
Any other comments on the transportation element? All right. Moving on to the community facilities, some things come up again, you know, in terms of making the downtown the focal area. Providing excellent recreational facilities and ensuring that development plans manage growth, in keeping with the community's ability and willingness to provide public services and facilities. So, I mean, I think right now, I mean, these are probably still fairly relevant. I think over the time since the 2010 plan, I think the town's done a pretty good job on the recreational facilities based on what we've heard and what we've seen. And the you know, managing growth, that's going to be a balancing act there, because you know, you still need growth to support your facilities, but you don't want to overburden them either. So it's just a matter of but looking at, again, looking at those growth boundaries, looking at the ability to provide water and sewer service to those areas and how that works.
I wonder, we talk about downtown area being the focal point. I wonder if we should like soften that and say one of the gathering areas of the town or something like that. So instead of it being the primary spot, the park could be one, downtown could be one. Anyway, just a thought, maybe change that a little bit.
I mean, there's something to be said for that, just from the standpoint of there are some other areas where, oh, excuse me, that phone call. There are some other areas where there seems to be some growth and some activity, towards the up towards the circle. So, oh, I want to have to jump off. It looks like I have an urgent call coming in.
Yep, no problem.
Sorry.
Yep. I mean, we have, the farmer's market's out the other end of town. You certainly can't put that up downtown. And
I kind of agree with what you said, but instead of saying downtown area will serve as a focus point, one of the focus points.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, I think,
or
yeah,
do we wanna
adding
make
the,
Excuse me, Chris,
Oh,
or
I'm
do we
sorry.
want to make it as one of the main focus points?
yeah,
Well, it does say a, not the.
yes.
I don't- Yeah.
Yeah, right, adding the parks, and as those are a real, the parks are a real focus point. And maybe changing the sentencing, the sentence structure to a future tense as opposed to a current tense, because at the time that this was written in 2008 or 9 or 10 or whatever, it was more of a focal point than it is today. And so, to make downtown serve as opposed to downtown being.
and maybe you just say, you just name them all, the parks, the downtown, and our shopping areas are the primary focal points of Taneytown, something to that effect.
Keep
I
in
think I've
mind, these
read-
are goals, not existing conditions.
Right.
What it is now, you go from one end of town to the other, and did I miss the focus point?
Yeah, I think it's good to have, to Jim's point, these are goals, right? And if, to this point, it seemed like the focus was on, what can we do to make the downtown area more vibrant, right? And I think that's still a lofty goal, right? Something that would definitely benefit the community as a whole, for sure.
I'm wondering too if it would maybe kind of remove the issue of the point to just take away the words focal point in the first place and just focus on improving the downtown or like Craig said, making it more vibrant or something, and just kind of reword it so that we're not getting stuck on that and people don't kind of, see that and get stuck on that as well.
I'd be good with that. Yep,
Yeah.
I'd be good with that.
Okay. Moving on to the natural areas or natural and agricultural resources. Identifying and protecting groundwater resources to ensure an ample municipal water supply for current and future users. And just a general environmental protection statement. And so I think that with regards to, this doesn't really talk about agriculture to a great extent, but that's been one of the things that's probably had the most impact on the city's ability to grow because of the agricultural easements that are surrounding the city now. Jim, am I correct on that assessment? That's something that we need to really kind of look at what those impacts are going to be in terms of how the city can grow in the future?
Uh, Certainly, we're going to be constrained going forward. This is a priority area for ag preservation, so we are being encircled slowly. That ring is getting a little tighter year by year. So ultimately, there will be a point, I think, where the city cannot grow outward any longer.
And then that also affects the water supply as well with those groundwater recharge areas.
Yes, yes.
So I don't know if we want to do anything, any thoughts on that agricultural preservation? I mean, it's in the title, but it doesn't really follow through in any of the uh, within those two objectives. So it's just a matter. I think what we need to do is kind of talk about balancing those ag preservation, uh, the county's goals with the city's need and ability to grow.
I mean, I think we ought to just take the agricultural part out of that.
We can do that too. Yeah.
You know, because frankly, like you say, as the ring tightens with the additional ag preservation that happens around us, what that directs and forces is development to infill within the areas that we have within the city. And so if you're trying to direct that development into those areas, then you're not at all protecting agriculture in those areas within the city. So I don't think that we're trying to protect agriculture within the city. I think we're trying to protect the resource, you know, as the resources protect themselves around us, we kind of have to not protect the agricultural resource within the city limits. That makes sense.
Not sure if I follow you there.
So, you know, if you look at some of the agricultural resources that are within the city limits, those are your prime spaces for your continued development. And those areas can't be ag-presed because they're already within the city and they're within the growth area. So, you know, as the ag-pres ring tightens around us, then we are by default not preserving agricultural resources within the city. If you see what I mean?
Right, but it also is limited in our growth.
But
Right.
Indirectly, that's a positive thing.
I'll just take agriculture out because we don't have any agriculture in Taneytown.
Well,
We do
we've
have
got the
some.
What do we have?
marijuana place out there, that's agriculture.
No, but I mean, like,
I mean, they are, because they're allowed to grow.
They're allowed to grow, yeah.
well, there are some farmed areas within city limits that are, you know, commercially farmed areas. So, you know, and those would be areas that you would want to look to for infill development as opposed to I would want to see all that infilled before we'd ever think about expanding the town again. You?
Well, by doing that, then you're limiting, you're not going to get your large houses. Because if you're going to restrict yourself to within the city, how many places do you have where you have R10,000 or R20,000?
Well, we don't have any or 20,000 in the
Okay.
city, do we?
One property,
What is that?
So you're restricted.
Baptist Church.
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned earlier too, you know, any of that large lot development is likely going to be relying on lot water and sewer rather than city water and sewer to serve those needs. So by default, that would be outside of any kind of annexation areas.
They have their own water and sewer, then they can't be in the city.
Well, they could be, but typically the city's going to grow with the water and sewer service boundaries. So
Yeah, but by county regulation, it'd have to be a 2-acre lot to have its own water and septic, right?
So I think that creates an interesting discussion point, and that is the fact that, you know, that's a policy decision that previous, you know, mayor and council made, that, you know, there will be no private water or septic systems within the city, with some, you know, exception language to that. Now, the reason, a big reason I advocate for, you know, higher density often is because of that infrastructure demand. and the return on the investment for that, and, you know, ongoing maintenance costs for it, because obviously the developer builds it once, we maintain it forever. But if that conversation were to be opened back up, you know, if the city wants to have that larger lot type subdivision, that more suburban type development, perhaps that wouldn't be served by water and sewer. I mean, that's contrary to a lot of, you know, state environmental goals and things of that nature, you know, because wastewater treatment plants are, you know, ours has been upgraded to enhance nutrient removal. So, you know, the nutrients escaping there are lesser than that from your typical septic system. Not to mention our soil types and everything make it hard for properties to perk for septic. But for the sake of conversation, if you wanted those R20 or those acre lots or what have you, maybe that's a conversation to have. If we're not running water and sewer out to them, and there's only a 2-lane road with no parking because you're going to have your 100-foot long driveway to park in, do they need to be served by water and sewer? Maybe that's a conversation to have. You know, if the community wants that type of growth, it isn't the ideal type of growth to be served by water and sewer, but if that's what the city wants, then maybe that policy needs to be reevaluated.
I think in today's regulatory environment, that's going to be kind of a tough sell.
Tough, yeah.
I agree.
But yeah, but it's, I mean, that kind of, you know, some of the things we're talking about are kind of contrary to one another. So it's a matter of just kind of talking through these issues, pluses and minuses, and then determining what is the right path for us. So, but I think to this point, I think we will take out that agricultural in that section, just because it really doesn't seem to really affect a lot of people or be a priority. Moving on to the economic development and activity. Was there any of those statements there that seem to be still relevant, maybe outdated?
I'm not sure we want to keep using the term greenway, but that'll be a discussion for offline probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we might just need to tweak the language when we talk about the road.
Yeah. Yeah, that means something different now than maybe what it did in 2010.
You know, so you want to change that language like Antrim Boulevard extension or something along those lines instead of the greenway, because that's kind of creates a whole different connotation.
Yeah. But I don't think there was anything that really came out of the survey. And Emily, you can jump in if there's anything that we've identified through the background that would change drastically what, you know, the approach on the economic development policies or visions.
No, nothing that I can think of that jumped out.
All right, moving on to the historic and cultural resources. Again, this was, I think, is one of the strengths of the city, and you know, and that came through in the survey as well. And I think there's some opportunities there to build on additionally, and you know, maybe some opportunities there to really, you know, kind of work on the branding and maybe a way of attracting more visitors to town. Anything in particular there that you want to discuss? Right. Chris, I think you said that there's a Main Street program going on again currently. Is that right?
We're trying to reconstitute it yet again.
Okay.
So we are in that process right now as a council. We are kind of evaluating what we want the program to look like and what we want it to accomplish, and trying to restructure or reset the structure for it to operate.
Yeah, because it's kind of interesting that looks like that was just started or just recently underway whenever the 2010 plan was done too.
Yeah, we're back where we started from, I think, with that. It's unfortunate, but that's just where we are. So, but the notations in these goals are still valid because it's still what you want to accomplish.
Right.
Stating a renewal at the beginning, you know, so it's right in line.
It's all still, it all still, unfortunately, is very.
Yeah.
Back where we were 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I mean, what we'll do with all of these is kind of update them, add some things. We'll take some things out like we've talked about tonight, but just put just kind of bring them up to more current terminology and standards, and just kind of refresh what's here, as well as add some things to them as well. Community involvement, I think we can probably build on. I mean, there's just one action item or one goal under that currently, and that's kind of been a theme all through what we've been talking about, is just looking at ways to strengthen that sense of community and those community ties, and making creating stronger investment in the community.
So you talk about community ties and you want everybody to be one, but just look like Meadowbrook. They're on another island to themselves. They have no way even to walk into town, like a lot of the communities we're building. So that's why you get individual things
Yeah,
around.
you're right. I mean, because of the way Meadowbrook was built, it doesn't. And we really have a tough time trying to find a walking path and a walkable path from that part of town to this part of town.
Oh, just just an alignment that would work to connect
Yeah.
connect them? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's no real good alignment. There's no good, there's no biker trail you could create. There's, the topography just doesn't lend itself to it. The railroad running through in a big, deep railroad cut kind of separates that also. And then the parks being out away from the downtown in the other direction, away from all of those developments, kind of hurts that also. It's just the geography and topography of the whole thing it works so tremendously against doing that. So we have to be that much more original in our thoughts about how to fix that.
I would say the walking, it's a roundabout way to get to where you're going, but it's relatively safe. I mean, there's sidewalks pretty much everywhere.
Yeah,
But
that's not really the question.
for biking, like riding a bike, yeah, it's kind of a mess.
Yeah. You're okay if you're running the back streets, but as soon as you get out to York, Frederick, and Baltimore streets, it's every man for himself.
When was that community built? What?
Meadowbrook?
Yeah.
It actually spanned about a 20-year period between the first phase and the last phase. So I guess phases 4 through 7 were probably over the last 8 years.
Okay.
But it was started in the early 2000s.
Oh, interesting. All right.
Accelerate. I guess if you add Meads Crossing to it, it's accelerated in the last 5 to 8 years, I guess.
Well, they were held up by an inadequacy for city facilities initially, and then the real estate market tanked, and so they kind of started to market again about the same time that Meads Crossing was. So yeah, so their last 3 sections sort of coincided with the Meads Crossing growth.
Yeah, even then though, wasn't a real focus on connectivity and connecting communities. So I mean, I will definitely, that'll definitely be a focal point within this plan is kind of focusing on opportunities to connect these communities. Um, and I understand there will be some challenges there, but we'll try and identify at least some alignments that might work to do that.
I ride my bike on the railroad tracks.
Yeah, and that's another one of those things, like the railroad tracks here, usually there's, a vehicle lane next to the railroad track. We don't even have that here, like where the maintenance trucks would run, and we don't even have that,
Yeah.
because you could do a hiker biker trail on that, but that would be, because that width doesn't exist, that it's nowhere to go.
Yeah. Next one was the interjurisdictional communication, basically just communication with other municipalities, the county, the state, and looking at partnering opportunities. I think the city's been pretty successful with that to this point. I mean, it's still something you want to encourage and continue to do, but I don't know if we'd change too
Right,
much.
Tiffany?
I think,
Yeah, I think,
I think we do good
I
on
think
that.
we're doing a fine job
We
with
have,
that.
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
good representation from the county.
Yes, yeah, and it's actually, I think, gotten better in the last couple of years.
Housing and community design, any thoughts on those particular goal statements?
Hard to tell the developer how you want their property or how they want to build out there. Right, yeah, they don't know what a brick is. So I think we would like to see more brick facing and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's
Hard
tough
to
to legislate the aesthetics. Yeah, yeah. So, one of the goals here was preserving the historical and architectural character of the area, rehabilitation of existing structures. So, I mean, I think one thing that is a challenge, right, is because of the number of rental properties in town that it's tough to get that investment in those properties that you would like to see. I mean, I know there's been some efforts previously with some facade improvements and things like that. And I mean, we think we still want to definitely encourage that and, help people identify maybe some grant opportunities or where maybe they can get some funding to help them do that work.
We do have a design standard downtown.
I
Yeah.
was just going to bring up that idea that those standards, for those who were around when they were being developed, were softened considerably between the work group and their adoption in response to critiques and political appetite to enact them. So I think the survey did, surprisingly to me, indicate that there is some appetite for historic preservation in the city. So I don't know if one of our goals might be to strengthen the existing regulations or anything like that. So food for thought.
I wonder if the folks that want to see that nice looking historical stuff actually own those buildings.
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say not.
I would like to see it.
But just thinking, under housing and community design, we talk about the historic and architectural character of the area. But what comes to mind when you talk about, the character of Taneytown? If we look at Copperfield or Robertsville Run or Meadowbrook, I could probably blindfold you and drop you in a cul-de-sac in any one of those neighborhoods, and you wouldn't be able to tell me which neighborhood you were in. So what is the character that we're, the character of the last 30 years has largely been whatever the developer has put on the table maybe with a few tweaks to say, well, could you do some brick or some stone veneer and, but it's largely the product that the builder wants to sell. It's product that's successful elsewhere, and there's very little adaptation to make it, I'll say, respect the architectural heritage of Taneytown. And I don't think we're any different than many other communities. But I think it's interesting when we talk about architectural character. What character is that? Is it the character of the last 30 years or the character of the previous, 150?
Kind of want to take the word "and" out of there, so instead of preserve the historical and architectural character, preserve the historical architectural character, so that you're, what you're trying to preserve is what's historic. You're not trying to preserve what, looks like every other house built since 1992.
Right. Yeah. And, for good or for bad, right, we really can't legislate the architecture or the building materials in a new suburban subdivision. I mean, what we can dictate are, street widths and lot sizes and green spaces, things of that nature. And we can provide an opportunity for good design. We just can't necessarily expect it to happen in every case. So, and but providing those opportunities and getting a certain design standard with regards to at least how a community is arranged is not a bad start. But just going back to the historic area where you do have design standards for the building facades and building materials, we can look at those standards and talk about maybe beefing those back up to maybe where they were to begin with. And then the last element is the water resources element, and this is actually a requirement within the plan that we address this. And Jim, the county is still working on their product. Is that correct?
They have circulated a draft. I think that the intent is to go into a public comment period shortly. I can double check the dates and times for that and share that with you and Emily.
Okay. So we have our draft in the plan as well, and we've looked at it with the population projections, but we definitely want to kind of coordinate it with what the county has put together before we finalize that.
Yeah, I think there's still a pretty long window before its actual adoption, though. So
Okay.
we'll have to talk on how best to
Integrate
implement that coordination.
Yeah. Okay. All right. But I think these two goal statements are still pretty much online with where we need to be today.
Is there some measure of redundancy with that, given that we talk about that back in the natural resources section, and we talk about it in the land use and growth management section? In both of those, we talk very specifically about the water resources in particular. So, I know it's a required element, but it's kind of folds into a number of the other things that we're doing.
And
It does. I guess I'll have to check the state standards with the water resources element. That's why we kind of pulled it out. That's why it was pulled out here, I'm sure, in this plan, because it was a required element. And it actually, particularly in Taneytown's case, like we talked about with the ag preservation parcels kind of encroaching on the growth boundaries, it is kind of an important element just because it has a lot to do with how the city can grow in the future.
And
Um,
those other areas where it's mentioned, it all needs to tie together. So, the growth element is going to be dependent upon the water resource piece. I think it's appropriate to make mention of it in a couple
Yeah,
areas.
yeah, it's not necessarily redundant. It's just kind of a theme that's kind of going throughout the plan, essentially. Yeah.
I think that rewording some of these as well could help to keep it from feeling like we're just copying and pasting the same exact, sentences over and over, and having it apply more to specifically land use when relating to water and things like that. So it's not just the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So that kind of wraps up what we had for tonight. Our next thing we'll do is we're going to take these statements, these vision statements, and rework them in light of what we heard tonight from the commission, as well as taking some of the elements of the comp plan and then looking at the background information and reworking these, adding new ones, taking some things out, and then so we'll get that out to you in advance for the next meeting.
March the 25th.
I think that's it. Yeah. And if it's above 50 degrees, we'll come down there.
I'm good.
Hopefully by next month, we will be there in that above 50 degrees.
Yeah.
German,
Make a motion, we adjourn.
second? Second, Bill?
Yep.
Favor of German, signify by saying aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise.
Thanks.
Thank you,
See you guys.
everyone.
Okay.
See
Thanks,
you
everybody.
next month.
See
Stay
ya.
warm.
Hey, good night.
Keep